everybody. Welcome to the Hancock County Sheriff's Debate. My name is Diana Troutman. I will be your moderator tonight. Thank you all for coming out. We've got a great turnout we're excited about tonight. Thank you to the Hancock County Library for hosting us. I want to give you guys a few important housekeeping items. You might have noticed as you came in that you've got note cards on your chair. This is so that you can submit questions throughout the debate. I encourage you to submit them early so that we can get them up here and ask the candidates. You'll have some people roaming around. As you fill out your question, just raise your hand. They'll come grab it for you and bring it up to me as we move through the debate. Please make sure that those questions are addressed to all of the candidates, not just one, and we'll try to get those answered. The second housekeeping thing I want to talk about is the format of the debate tonight. We will have 2 minutes for each candidate to answer each of the questions. We will have no opening remarks and no rebuttals, but we will have 2 minutes of closing remarks for each candidate as well. We're going to try really hard to keep this under an hour and a half, and so that's why I encourage you to get your questions in early. And then also I want to note that the library will need to close, so after we wrap things up by 8:30, try to vacate the area by about 8:45 if you can. We really appreciate that. Before we get started too, I also want to mention that the candidates are in order from left to right. We'll start on the far left for the first question, and as we move through the questions, we'll move to the left. So I'll go ahead and introduce our candidates as well. We have Brad Burkhart, we have Donnie Smith, we have Donnie Munden, and we have Wayne Addison. So again, thank you all for coming, and we will go ahead and get started. So my first question is going to be for Mr. Burkhart, and the first question is, what are your top 3 priorities for your time in office?
My top 3 priorities for I'm in office is the same things that we're actually doing now. You know, we've done a lot of things in the last 7 years. I serve as the chief deputy, and so you know, we're dealing with the opioid crisis. We're obviously dealing with the jail, which I'm sure there's going to be some questions about that right now. We're dealing with mental illness in the community, and so, you know, what we need to do is deal with prevention and education, treatment and enforcement. And so, you know, in 2015, I was able to negotiate with county council to get narcotics investigators on the sheriff's department. And so, as we've seen the opioid crisis increase, you know, there's a need out there to arrest and the drug dealers, and when we can do that, we can slow down some of the use out here that's in the facility or in the county. And so, along with that, as we concentrate on, you know, the dealers, we also concentrate on the treatment aspect of it, and we do that in the jail. We do it now, and with different kinds of programs that we actually facilitate in there. One of the things I would like to see more of is on the prevention end of it. I think there's a need out there, and we do DARE programs, you know, around the 5th and 6th grade area. I really think there's a need for the middle school, high school age group, because we kind of missed that gap. And so if we can teach them and make them understand that going down a road of opioid use or drug use is not going to lead them in a good place, maybe we can prevent some of this stuff that we're actually dealing with. So thank you.
Thank you. So now I'll pass the question to Mr. Smith. What are your top 3 priorities for your time in office?
My first priority would be to improve the overall morale of everyone on the sheriff's department. You know, obviously, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different question. But I think there is room for improvement as far as the morale. That can come in all different sorts of ways. It could come through, you know, a pay raise. It could come through a change in uniform. I think we need to go to a more practical type uniform for our guys that work the road. You know, a pair of uniform pants right now that we wear are over $100. One trip through the bushes, those $100 pants are done. Plus, you know, they're cold in the winter, they're hot in the summer, and I think that would improve the overall morale, especially with the road division, which is our largest division on the sheriff's department. In addition, you know, I think we can give them some choices as far as for example, cars we drive, set a limit as far as what kind of vehicle, or a price limit, and let them choose a car. Now, obviously, it has to be a police car, a certified police car. Secondly, I think, you know, I would do everything I could to reduce our population in the jail. And that could be done through getting more level 6 offenders on home detention, getting more level 6 offenders in work release, expanding work release. You know, I think that that's a big thing. And my last thing I would like to do is increase the number of officers on the road. If you increase the number of officers on the road, that does 3 things. It allows a better response time for you all calling service when a deputy shows up. It also provides better protection for the citizens and the deputies that are working out there. And it also is a deterrent to crime. The more visibility, the more police cars you see driving around, obviously the less likely you are to commit a crime here in Hancock County. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'll pass the question to Mr. Munden. What are your top 3 priorities for your time in office?
Well, the top 3 priorities I have, the first 2, there's no 1 and 2, they both kind of go hand in hand. Obviously, we need to deal with the overpopulation inside the jail. We need to come up with a plan that it's not going to cost taxpayers $55 million to construct a criminal justice complex. There's another plan that I have that actually I'm going to be releasing an ad in the Daily Reporter over the weekend that kind of outlines that plan. I encourage the taxpayers to read it and to familiarize yourself with it and see what they think about my ideas. Because of the jail overcrowding is caused, I should say, the jail overcrowding is part of it's caused by drug abuse in Hancock County. Obviously, the opioid problem is a hot topic across the nation. And 4 years ago when I ran for sheriff, I was talking about the need for drug investigators in our county. The current administration did not have at that point any drug investigators assigned to Hancock County. And I thought it was important that we deal with the people who are overdosing on heroin and also passing away from overdoses from heroin. But in the last couple of years, we have had some local investigators working on that. I think it's something that's much needed. We need to do more of. And then the third priority that I would deal with is I think we need to, as a police agency, as the largest police agency in our county, we need to do more to work with the youth in our community and some community outreach programs that would include our officers being involved in civic organizations, also involved with Little League baseball teams and scouting and so forth. I think that once we get the community on our side to work hand in hand with us, it's something that we can do to bridge that gap within our community. We have a safe community here in Hancock County. Excuse me. We have some good officers at the sheriff's office, and I would like to see us interact more with our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll pass the question to Mr. Addison. What are your top 3 priorities for your time in office?
Number 1 priority is basically we have to get tough on crime and tough on rehabilitation. Basically what I mean from that is this opioid crisis. I will immediately put another detective as far as working in the drug crisis with the current personnel we have now. Reassignment of personnel, we're going to do that because we have to get tough on the crime. We have to get to the dealers and make sure that those dealers are put away. That's part of what we have to do. Now the rehabilitation part, that's where I hope to use my expertise. 25 years ago, as a chief probation officer, I started hiring drug and mental health counselors to work with in my department. I cross-trained them as probation officers. We have created dozens and dozens of treatment and rehabilitation programs. Most of what's being done in the jail is basically being done by the probation department there. So we were going to continue and expand on that. The second thing is going to involve citizen community safety. What I plan to do is start what I'm calling a positive police interaction. Most people I talk to say the only time they have contact with law enforcement is if they're speeding or if they've been burglarized, this, that, or the other. What I want to do is make sure that my officers are trained so that they understand that we need to spend positive time talking with the public, getting to know them, and knowing what issues are going on. If we get their trust and get them behind us, then the saying of see something, say something becomes a reality, and they can help us to report these crimes and to help us to report who is dealing drugs and that type of thing. The other thing I plan to do is a prisoner work program. I will have a citizen reserve. I've been talking to ex-police officers, ex-military personnel, and a lot of business people. And we are going to start a prisoner work program where you're going to see prisoners out on the highway picking up trash. They're going to clean the inside of the jail, and that's something we're going to do, and I'm out of time.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to the second question, and this one we're going to start with Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, if the new jail proposal is declined, how do you propose handling jail overcrowding?
Well, I think, first thing we need to look at is, as I said before, work release and home detention. The state kind of stuck us with the level 6 offenders that we have to house now. And most of the time, those level 6 offenders are the nonviolent property crime type of individuals. So we need to look at getting more of those individuals out in work release and in home detention. And what goes along with that also is that I think we need to look at revamping how home detention and work release is paid for. I really don't see a problem with creating a program like they do on child support where it comes directly out of their check every 2 weeks instead of them having to come up with the money. Obviously, that would take care of funding those programs a lot more efficiently. I also think you can look at expanding work release. My thing about the jail is that the name on the door says the Hancock County Jail. It's not the Hancock County Treatment Facility. It's not the Hancock County Rehabilitation Facility. It's the Hancock County Jail. And my idea of jail is number one, you don't want to go there. Number two, if you do go there, you don't ever want to go back. And lastly, once you get out, you definitely don't want to ever go back. So, jail needs to be jail. Everybody in there has either been convicted of a crime or there's been probable cause found that they have committed a crime. As far as the mental health issue part of it, if they're not mentally competent to stand trial, then obviously the court has a system in place to take care of those individuals to see if they're competent. So, number one, make the jail a jail, obviously according to the letter of the law. But, those are my ideas as far as what to do if we don't build a $55 million jail. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll pass the question to Mr. Munden. Apologies. If the new jail proposal is declined, how do you propose handling jail overcrowding?
I hope that the new jail proposal is declined because, like I said, I think it'd be a burden on taxpayers to pay $55 million when we can take care of the issues faster and cheaper and more efficiently with the other plans that could be in place. I think that one of the things that we need to do is we do need to get more people who are eligible for work release back to work and support themselves and their family. A lot of people don't realize that the people who are on work release and house arrest pay user fees, so that the county recoups most of the money it costs to have them on those programs. And if we were to double the size of the people, double the number of inmates that we currently have on work release, obviously that would be those people providing for their families and themselves. Secondly, there are doubling the population of the people on work release. If we have inmates who are eligible, that's where they should be instead of sitting in jail. Obviously, the most of the offenders who are on work release are low-risk offenders. They're nonviolent criminals, and we do have people that's in our jail currently that's on the waiting list, especially some of our female inmates. We currently have a capacity of about 12 females who can be on work release. There's probably another 25 to 50 that are waiting for that program for a bunk to open up so they can move to the community correction center. So, there's programs that we can do that would allow to put people back to work, to utilize some of the workers around our jail to move them to a to a part of the jail that's not currently used for general population, and we could use those inmates for the workers program and also for the road crew pickup. So, there's other options out there, and I think that we need to explore those instead of spending $55 million.
Okay. Thank you. And now I'll pass the question to Mr. Addison. If the new jail proposal is declined, how do you propose handling jail overcrowding?
Well, first of all, it's not just a jail proposal. It needs to be, everybody needs to understand this is a criminal justice system proposal. It does involve as far as the jail, but say if it's declined. I have worked with the county council, county commissioners for 35 years. I was a department head 35 years. I've had a good record working with them, trying to work through and getting things accomplished that we need to do. If it's turned down, basically we have to have something going. We have to get something to get space. Perhaps we could make an addition like they did down in Dearborn County to make a treatment facility. The last thing we want to do is start releasing everybody to work release. If we release them to work release and they're not ready to go there yet, number one, the people on heroin, they're going to kill themselves. That's the reason we started the heroin protocol. Number two, we don't want to get people on work release and then have something happen. That's going to be a cause where people are going to say, let's close down the work release system. So we do need to house people. People need to be housed. If we do get turned down, if the jail is turned down in the criminal justice complex, perhaps we would be able to build a treatment facility. And when I'm talking about not just treatment, I mean it could be a half the size of what we're looking at. And we could provide adequate room for mental health treatment, having probation officers and other officers in there trying to work through on the treatment aspect. We also need room for an infirmary. Someone gets sick, we need to be able to have them in a spot. So if it happens that it's turned down, I will immediately work with the council, work with the commissioners to try to get something established, because we do need something, because we're overcrowded. It is desperately overcrowded. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll pass the question to Mr. Burkhart. If the new jail proposal is declined, how do you propose handling jail overcrowding?
Well, I don't necessarily think that the jail proposal in itself is going to get turned down. Will the referendum pass? Possibly not. However, the legislature has, done us some good favors here recently. They passed an income tax bill that's going to help assist that. And so just because the referendum doesn't pass, that was one tool in the toolbox. That was a tool that we could utilize to actually help fund this particular facility. And so just because that doesn't pass doesn't necessarily mean that this project will not happen, because we do have other options. What we also need to understand is we are under the letter of the law when it comes to a jail. We have to follow the Indiana Administrative Code. It's 210 under Indiana's Administrative Code, and you can look it up. And what it says is that the county council and the county commissioners must provide the sheriff with a facility for the safety and security of the staff and the inmates. That's it. And they have to do that. And we are one step from being federally sued to make us or mandate us into building the facility that we may not want. And we want to do it on our terms. We want to be able to build the facility on our agenda. And so that's what we've been trying to do. I have worked with county commissioners and county council on this project since early 2016. I have stats where we show we were overcrowded back in 2008 and prior to that. And so this is not a new problem. This has been going for such a long time. We need to do something now. If we do not do something now, that problem is going to continue to be there. The population growth is going to continue to grow in Hancock County. Construction costs is going to continue to rise. Now's the time to do something with it. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move on to our third question, and this will start with Mr. Munden. As Hancock County continues to grow, how do you propose appropriate patrol coverage to continue to support this growth?
Well, obviously, we'd have to work with the county council. If we need more manpower, we'd have to work with the county council to get the funding provided for that. We currently have adequate coverage at the sheriff's office. We could certainly improve on that. There are times that we currently have a minimum staffing of 4 officers. And that doesn't seem like a lot, obviously, for Hancock County. We do rely a lot on the city of Greenfield, towns of McCordsville, Fortville, New Palestine, Shirley, Wilkinson, those other agencies that have officers who can lend hand to us. But, you know, obviously, if there's a shortage that if we have a big growth spurt where we need immediate manpower and we don't have enough to take care of the calls we're getting, that's something that we'd have to do some analysis on to find out what our response times are, to find out what we can do to improve those response times. But, you know, bottom line is we need to make sure that there's enough people working at any given time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, so that if someone calls 911, that we have an officer who can be there. We strive for, you know, to reduce the amount of calls, or not the amount of calls. Well, we strive to remove the amount of calls, but we also want to reduce the response times, and that includes, you know, as a patrol commander for day shift, you know, we have to make sure that our officers are in certain areas round the clock, and that, you know, that means if the officer who's assigned to the New Palestine area stays in the New Palestine area. And we did that years ago to make sure that there were officers there, that if someone had a legitimate emergency, that we had an officer there as quickly as they could to tend to that emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Addison, as Hancock County continues to grow, how do you propose appropriate patrol coverage to continue to support this growth?
This is one reason. I spent 30 years basically as a reserve deputy and special deputy. I was a reserve for a while and then special deputy for a few years. And basically a reserve system is the modern day posse. Back in the old days when you saw on TV where they would get a posse put together and we'd go out, you know, and let's help work on this crime. We have got to continue to support our Hancock County Sheriff Department Reserve Division. When I was reserve captain, the commander of the reserve, we had 35 reserve officers. I spoke to them last month and they're down to 22. So we need to try to work on recruiting and getting as many reserve officers as we can. We also have a way of some reserve officers are having cars assigned to them at their home. Basically what that means is that when a call comes out, if there's a reserve that lives half a mile down the road, he can go. He can be there. He can be ready to go and answer that call. So that's one way that I feel like we need to expand our reserve division. Donnie and all of them are right. We're going to have to work with the county council and commissioners on getting more people at times. I plan to try to utilize as many administrative people doing administrative jobs and merit deputies doing a merit deputy job. So if somebody's doing something inside that an administrative person I could hire could do, I'm going to release that officer to be out working the streets, to be out working. That's where I'm talking about having a drug detective, somebody that was a jail commander for several years, could have been a detective. You know, we could have had a civilian, which we do now, as working in the jail. So I'm going to utilize the manpower we have to the best of our ability, utilize our reserve division, and we're going to go from there. So I got other things I would like to talk about, but the 10-second time is up, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Burkhart, as Hancock County continues to grow, how do you propose appropriate patrol coverage to continue to support this growth?
Well, our population will continue to grow. You know, like I said, it's estimated to grow in the next 20 years somewhere between 91,000 to 100,000. And so as we bring in business, as we bring in economic growth, that brings in people. That brings in more population. And we can't guarantee that 100,000 people coming in are going to be good people. There's going to be some bad ones in there. And so with that, we're going to have to figure out a way to increase our manpower. I had somebody once ask me, what quality of service do you want to give? And I said, well, I want to give the best, the excellent quality of service available. And in order to do that, you have to have the manpower to be able to do that. And so what everybody needs to understand, I keep going back to it, and the other candidates, we're at the mercy of county council once in a while. I've been doing the chief deputy for the last 7 years, and I do a lot with county council, and I go to every meeting and every budget committee meeting, and we talk about staffing issues, and we talk about money, and it is very hard to get things accomplished when there's no funding for it. And so we will have to look at that down the road. Sometimes we kick the can down the road. We're going to have to stop kicking it. In the last 7 years, this administration has increased the reserve division and using cars We have actually assigned them cars to drive. They are at their houses. The response times are greater when they have them there. We have started a lease program where there's a few officers that actually have bought their, reserve officers have actually bought their own police car. And then they lease it to the county. We pay them their mileage when they're actually out there working. And so the plan is this year to also add 2 more cars to that reserve program, depending on the trade-in value and what we can actually get out of it. And so we're just going to have to continue to work to add to that quality of service we can for the county.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, as Hancock County continues to grow, how do you propose appropriate patrol coverage to continue to support this growth?
Well, obviously, anybody that has followed me, and you know that this is one of my biggest priorities, is to get, however you want to say it, more boots on the ground, more deputies out there. That's what I do. I do that 5 days a week. I did it today, I'll do it tomorrow, and I'll do it Saturday. I agree that we need to utilize the reserve division a little more. When I spoke to him, I did indicate that, especially the reserve deputies with the cars would be asked to do more than what they do now as part of having that vehicle at their house and being able to drive that vehicle. Also, I think there are some positions at the Sheriff's Department that could be combined and free up some merit deputies to come out and work the road. That may be unpopular with some people, but if you're a Hancock County deputy, you need to be a Hancock County deputy is the way I look at it. And also, if elected, I'm going to be a working sheriff. And what I mean by that is that if I take time off, it's going to be the time off I've earned over the last 26 years I've been on the Sheriff's Department. Vacation time, sick time, personal time. Those are the days I will take off during the year like everybody else. Even though I'm an elected official and I'm not required to do that, that's what I will do. If I'm not busy in the office, I will be in a car and I will be driving around. I want the people of Hancock County to know Smitty is their sheriff and know my face and know who I am. That goes with my car 2, my chief deputy, and it goes with my car 3. And I know sometimes that's not going to be possible. There will be days where you are in an office for 8 hours to get business done. But even if it's an hour, that's an extra car on the road. And I would expect that out of me, my chief deputy, and my road division commander. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to question number 4, and we're going to start with Mr. Addison. What qualities or skills do you believe a sheriff needs?
Number one, I feel a sheriff needs to have the respect of the public. A sheriff needs to have high moral values. I believe a sheriff needs to be able to set a good example for his deputies as well as the people in the community. That's one thing. It's not a secret that I grew up as a kid around the Sheriff's Department. Bob Sebastian was a sheriff back when I was 7 years old. My mother worked as the matron. My dad was a special deputy, and then Malcolm Grass came on, was sheriff, and then I got hired as a reserve deputy with Malcolm. They told me when I was a kid that you have one chance for your reputation. And so I have worked my entire life making sure that I have a positive reputation. I have skills that I feel like others can look up to. And I feel like that if a sheriff is there, we represent the public. The people need to be able to understand that I need to report to this man. I have dealt with people. I've talked about that positive police interaction. I've done that my entire career at probation. I've been retired for 6 months. I had to retire in order to run for sheriff. I've been retired for 6 months, and there's not a week goes by that somebody's not contacting me, telling me so-and-so's using drugs, so-and-so's stealing this, so-and-so's doing that. They feel comfortable to approach me. That has come from that positive police interaction. I've dealt with them. They trust me, and they know that I'm a quality person. When I give my word, I give my word. I give my word to my family. And it's one of those things that hopefully I will lead by example, and the officers throughout the entire department will have that same trust. They will have that same ability to work with the public and get answers when we need to know what's going on in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burkhart, what qualities or skills do you believe a sheriff needs?
Excuse me. I think that, the qualities and skills that a sheriff needs is, some of the things that I've actually done in my career. I've spent 34 years in public safety, and it's not just law enforcement, it is public safety. I started as a volunteer fireman back in high school, and then I went to college. I became a jail officer, worked inside the jail for a while, became a road deputy, spent 16 years doing that. Moved into investigations, working on sex crimes and sex offenders and warrant service. Spent 20 years in tactical operations and special teams. I did underwater search and rescue for 25 years. I became an instructor. I've been there. I think a sheriff needs to be somebody that's actually served as a public servant, somebody that's served in the sheriff department as a career, and actually done the job. And we do, it's a hard job. It's very difficult. And through the career that we've actually have, it's a passion. It's been a passion for me. I do more than 8 hours a day. I'm there for quite a long time in the evening, spending a lot of time. I do a lot of training outside of it. I spend a lot of time right now doing active shooter training in the civilian world. And I've spent the last year, 7 years as the chief deputy. And so that experience that I've had as chief deputy has put me in that position to be able to continue on with what I've done in the last 34 years in public safety. And so, it's that challenge that we have out there on a day-to-day basis that we do in public safety. Like I said, it's not just law enforcement that we do in today's world. It's more public safety oriented in today's world. And so that's what I've done. I think that's what we need to look at. I think that's what your sheriff should be. And I think that that's why I'm the next candidate to be that sheriff.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, what qualities or skills do you believe a sheriff needs?
Well, first of all, experience, obviously. To be able to do any job, you need to know how to do that job. April 19th, I will be a full-time law enforcement officer for 30 years. Out of those 30 years, I have worked the road, including now, for 26 of those years. Obviously, I have a pretty good idea of what goes on out here in the county. I do it every day. I deal and have dealt with recently a female with mental illness. She was at the Speedway washing her inside of her windows in her cars for an hour and a half with her squeegee when we got a call with 2 kids in the car just last week. Just prior to that, we had a lost autism 14-year-old that we ended up finding. I ended up putting him in my Tahoe and driving him out of the field and taking him home. Not too long ago also, we had a incomplete 911 call at a location where we had a hostage situation, a SWAT call out. I ended up being the first one in the door to go in there and make sure she was okay, which she was. If she would have been there much longer, she probably would have passed away. But it's not about that. It's just that you need to know how to do the job to be an effective leader. And I heard a long time ago that the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer in the county. Now, some chiefs Chief of Greenfield may argue with that, and some of the other town marshals, but to me, the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer in the county. That's what I am. I'm not a politician. I'm a law enforcement officer. That's all I've done for the last 30 years. And I heard also a long time ago, and I've always remembered this, to be a good leader, you lead from the front, you lead by example, and you never ask anybody to do anything you haven't done or you're not willing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Munden, what qualities or skills do you believe a sheriff needs?
I don't always agree with these guys at the table, but in this one I do agree with. I'm just kidding. We agree quite often, but I think experience. I started out with our agency. I come from a law enforcement family. I have 2 brothers. They're captains, one with our department, one with the Greenfield Police Department. and my father was a police officer. But, you know, I grew up in a law enforcement family. I started my career with the Sheriff's Department technically in 1982 when I was a sophomore in high school when they had an Explorer program that I took part of. I quit that program to go into college where I got a degree in law enforcement. Graduated with honors from Vincennes University with that degree and was lucky enough to get hired at the Sheriff's Office about 6 months after I graduated college. And I've spent my entire career to try to represent the Sheriff's Office in a positive way. I've always treated people fairly. I got a thank you letter one time from a guy I had sent to prison just because I treated him fairly, and he appreciated that. I've still got the letter somewhere, but you know, I think that the sheriff does need to have the experience of every aspect of the job. And there's a lot of moving parts at the sheriff's office: administrative stuff, drug stuff, dealing with inmates, dealing with purchasing, dealing with the county council, dealing with the county commissioners. And there's so many moving parts that unless you've performed those functions, and I've been all the way from, in my career, been a dispatcher, jail officer, all the way through patrol, investigations, SWAT, and chief deputy for our department, and acting sheriff for a while. But there's a lot of things that unless you have that experience, you wouldn't be able to do that. And obviously, you know, treating people fairly is part of that. I pride myself in the fact that, you know, for the last 30+ years of working at the sheriff's office, I've always looked at myself as though my boss was over my shoulder. And I've spent that time being a sheriff's deputy, and now I want to be elected sheriff where I could be a deputy sheriff.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question, and we're going to start with Mr. Burkhart. Mr. Burkhart, do you support the use of body cams by your department?
That's a good question. Well, I do support that. That's not something necessarily we've delved into right now. You know, we've actually used video camera systems inside our patrol cars since early 90s, you know, around 92, 93. I used to install those when I installed equipment inside the vehicles. And so I am a proponent of video cameras. I am a proponent of the video cameras that you wear on your body cam, or the body cams. You know, it serves a purpose. I know there's a lot of up in the air stuff right now. You know, the reason we really haven't looked into it a lot is, you know, it's still fairly new. There's still some legislation out there, you know, as far as the right to privacy that really hasn't got answered. You know, when you go into a house, you know, do you turn it on? Do you turn it off? You know, what's the expectation of privacy inside of a residence when you do that? And so, you know, we haven't looked into it a lot just because it hasn't got through the weeds yet. And, you know, when everybody gets everything settled, you know, that was something that we would actually look at. And so, you know, it's good. It's good for the safety of officers. It keeps everybody honest. It seems like anymore, for whatever reason, you know, back in the day we didn't have video cameras, and so we relied on the word of the officer when we did our probable causes and we went to court. But it seems like now anymore that if you don't have video evidence, you know, it's hard to push a case through without that. And so it is a good thing to have for that. I mean, you know, it can make or break a case. I mean, you know, it gives you the evidence that you need when you go to court. And so, you know, I think that if down the road, you know, if I'm able to be sheriff, and we would actually look at something in the future to be able to do that. There's so many different systems out there on how they actually work, you know, whether it's night vision or not night vision. And so when they get it all figured out, we'll look into it and see where we go with it. So thank you.
Mr. Smith, do you support the use of body cameras by your department?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with it. You know, as a matter of fact, I know Brad touched on when we first went to in-car cameras. I was here then, and I remember some of the guys were doing some mumbling and grumbling, and to me, it was always, you know, a way that you can protect yourself. As long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you have nothing to worry about. And as a matter of fact, I actually had the first vehicle pursuit on video in Hancock County as far as the Sheriff's Department. And as a matter of fact, I think it was probably one of the first, it's actually a sentencing hearing that a video was used in Judge Culver's court way back when, that was about 94 or so, I think, 93, 94. The pursuit actually ended in the front parking lot of the jail. He knew where he was going, I guess. So it was a short walk. But anyway, I think, you know, it is a good idea. Is it a necessary thing right now for Hancock County? I don't think so. I think the officers we have on the Sheriff's Department, we give them a car, we give them a gun, we give them a shotgun, we give them a patrol rifle. We should be able to trust them to go out and do their job and do what they're supposed to do. If somebody would come along and say, and I'm elected sheriff, say, Sheriff Smitty, we want to give you $200,000 to give everybody body cameras. Heck yeah, I'll take them. I'll be more than happy to. But I think we need to look at when the need arises. Look at it. I would not have a problem with it. It's just the funding, like anything else. That's where we would have to look. I think, you know, with the officers we have, the money could be, if we have to come up with it, maybe be better spent in other places. But you know, that's my thinking on it, and I wouldn't be opposed to it. And you know, at some point, I think we're probably going to have to go to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Munden, do you support the use of body cameras by your department?
I'm not opposed to body cameras either. It is about funding. I mean, it's not only about the expense of the cameras, but it's also about the retention of the evidence or the video once you capture it. You know, I think I saw one time that there was a court that recommended you keep it for 99 years. Well, if you put it on a hard drive nowadays, you know, the storage was used in computers even 20 years ago was floppy disk. You know, I'd be hard pressed that if anybody in this room's got a floppy disk in their computer at home. So, you know, just the retention of the evidence once you attain it for 99 years would be virtually impossible. You know, there are other items that we are facing monetarily with budgets the way they are that I think we need to prioritize that. And, you know, the other thing is our agency does not characteristically have any officers who have use of force issues. And if we do develop officers with those use of force issues, you know, we need to deal with those officers and get rid of them. You know, luckily, you know, I train our officers when we get new officers that you need to conduct yourself so that the sheriff or the news channel is right over your shoulder with a camera. And you know, everybody knows that everybody in the community nowadays has cell phones that has cameras on. So, you know, I'm not opposed to somebody if they walk up to me when I'm conducting myself as a police officer, if they're videotaping a traffic stop or whatever, you know, I'd have no problem with that because I know that I'm conducting myself professionally and treating people fairly. So, you know, why we should, you know, go and put a bunch of, like Donnie Smith said, you know, if somebody gives us $200,000 to buy a bunch of cameras, that's fine. But we also need to look at what we have to do to retain that evidence once we receive it. So it's not just the initial investment of the cameras, it's what happens afterwards. And like I said, you treat people fairly and that wouldn't be an issue to start with.
Thank you. Mr. Addison, do you support the use of body cameras by your department?
Obviously, I would not be opposed, just like everybody else had, as far as if you have those body cams. First thing I would do, I believe right now that I think Fortville, Shirley, and New Palestine, I think they do have body cams. So what I would initially do is try to talk to the chiefs in those areas to see pros and cons of what they have found, how those things work. Do they feel like it's beneficial to them? Realistically, the day and age, we're in the age of technology. You know, so it is a situation that no matter what happens, people in the United States are looking at ways to blame somebody else for something they did wrong. I'm going to tell my officers basically their number one job is to go home safe at night. I don't care what it takes. Their number one job is to go home safe at night. If for some reason something has to happen where they are put in a situation where they're forced to use deadly force or to do something, I want them to be protected because we know the media is going to come out. No matter what the situation is, the media is going to come out. They're going to say, you were wrong, you should have done this, that, or the other. This is just one way to protect the officers and to protect the community and show that they did act with justification. I'm not sitting here saying I think every officer we have good officers. We have good men. There's 3 good officers right here that work that I would trust them as far as being out here on what they would do on a call. But if for some reason the unthinkable happens, that justification that they did their job, they did the right thing, could protect Hancock County and could protect each one of these officers. So again, there's maybe federal grants that we could look for, but that is a positive thing that would help the officers and the community.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next question, and we'll start with Mr. Smith. How will you navigate working between the council and commissioners who don't always agree?
How long do I have? No, actually, when I said earlier, you know, my 30 years of doing this, that there was a 4-year gap there, where actually, you're exactly right, sir, whoever said that. I spent 4 years as the operational division commander of the Hancock County Sheriff's Department. And basically what I did was I handled virtually every line item, every account, with the exception of food, commissary, and the narcotics division of the Sheriff's Department. I bought everything from toilet paper to guns, and from cars to jail uniforms, and anywhere between. I also handled the fleet, and I also was in charge of purchasing, and I also was in charge of putting together a budget with our matron and then presenting it to the then sheriff and getting his approval to be presented for approval to the county council. I also worked with the county commissioners. So basically, I have experience working with the county council. You know, when we had to have major repairs, obviously I had to go before the county council and justify why we would need money. When I had to buy new vehicles every year, I had to go in front of the county commissioners and justify and tell them what kind of vehicles I would like to purchase and put together a proposal. So I am very familiar, and it's not been that long ago. It was 7 years ago. It was between 2007 and 2010 that I served as operations division commander. So I do have a good idea of what it takes to maintain a budget, put a budget together, present a budget, and stay within that budget over those years. You know, it's a multi-million-dollar budget then, and I know it's even more so now. So I think you need to do your homework, and when you present a proposal to them, make sure you dot the I's and cross the T's, and have everything together so that they can understand what you want. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll pass the question to Mr. Munden. How will you navigate working between the council and commissioners who don't always agree?
Well, I've worked with the council and the commissioners in the past, and you know, I'm fairly easygoing. I think if you're realistic with the council and the commissioners, and you need something, if you can go over and justify, I've never had an issue with the council or the commissioners working with the requests that we had when I served as chief deputy. But it's important that you do play well with others. I mean, they're elected officials as well. They have an obligation to the taxpayers and the voters that they were put in a position to make sure that, you know, they're not spending money that's not necessarily need to be spent. They're not appropriating and creating projects that are not necessary. You know, there's you know, it used to be, I remember when I was in elementary school, you got the grade card that had several different categories, and one was always plays well with others. And you know, I think that that's something we need to keep in mind, that you know, you can't go over and demand stuff from the council and commissioners that's either not realistic or financially not possible. So you know, I think that I've always had a history of working well with our county commissioners and our county council, whoever they are, and I think that I would continue to do that, and just make sure that when you give them a presentation, to make sure that it's something that's necessary and it's something that's economically feasible, and something that, you know, that if you have that stuff, like Donnie said, if you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and it's something that's justified, I don't think we've never had a problem, for the most part, getting what we needed at the sheriff's office. We're well equipped.
Thank you. Mr. Addison, how will you navigate working between the council and commissioners who don't always agree?
This is actually one area where I know I will shine. I've spent 35 years as a chief probation officer in Hancock County. I dealt with the commissioners and council that entire time. I know I have their respect because there have been times when I go to them and they say, no, we don't have the money to be able to do this. I would say, if I can work out another way to do this and present that to you, will you be of support? And they have. 25 years ago, I went to the council and said, if you'll give me $50,000, I'll show you how I can save the county $500,000. That's when we hired mental health and addictions counselors to work in the probation department. They were cross-trained, and we started doing things totally different. We didn't send juveniles to the institutions like we were doing before, and it proved to be a money saver, probably more than $500,000 over the years, but it did prove to be a money saver. Back in 2008, when we had the economic crunch, we were spending $300,000 to $500,000 per year on juvenile detention. I worked with the commissioners and I said, if you'll let me do some work, I think we can get that done. Back, it's probably been, like say, 8 years ago or better, we got the contract with Delaware County to where we now pay $200,000 a year for 2,000 bed days on our juvenile detention. That saved the county millions of dollars over this period of time. We're still paying $200,000 a year with that. If I'm sheriff, if I'm elected by the people, if the people put me in trust and put me in this position, I personally will be the one that's going to deal with the council. I'm not going to send my deputies. I'm going to be the one that's going to deal with them. I can say, I'm representing the public. I'm representing the people. This is what we need. I will explain to them why we need it, and I will make sure that if we don't get it, I'm going to look for other ways to get it done. But I work well with the council and commissioners, and I look forward to that opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Burkhart, how will you navigate working between the council and commissioners who don't always agree?
Well, that's true. They don't always agree. I'll give you that. You know, in law enforcement and being a road deputy for many years, you know, we're used to fast-paced type of things happening. You know, we think things are going to happen very quickly. When I became chief deputy, and you know, Sheriff Shepard gave me the opportunity to do a lot of things. He gave me the opportunity to shine in many different areas. And so one of those opportunities is to be able to communicate and talk with county council and county commissioners on a regular basis. And I attend just about every meeting. I've probably only missed a couple throughout my 7 years as chief deputy. But what I learned very quickly is when you're dealing with local government, things don't happen very fast. And so, you know, I learned fast that, you know, you have to go ask the county commissioners some things. And then when you get that approved through them, then you have to go to ask county council to fund it. And then after they fund it, then you got to go back to county commissioners to get permission to use the funding. And so it's a process that is taken a little bit of time to learn. However, I've become very good at it, I think, in working with them. And so sometimes you have to be persistent. You can't go in there and just say, you know, okay, I agree with what you say and move on. I'm not that type of individual. You know, sometimes they tell you no. I'll come back the next month and we'll renegotiate the terms of the no. And so, you know, I've done that in many cases. I did that on the narcotics investigators. It took me about 3 to 4 months to be able to persuade them due to the opioid crisis that we need investigators. It was actually done mid-season throughout an emergency type funding. And so we didn't wait to the budget cycle and do it at the beginning of the year. Also did that last year with pay raises. And, you know, they said no at the beginning. They said don't put in for it. I was persistent and was able to get pay raises for the deputies. And so you have to be persistent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, and this will go to Mr. Munden first. Mr. Munden, how do you feel about arming teachers or having more officers inside of schools?
Well, I'm a firm believer of the Second Amendment, and as a matter of fact, I'm a member of the United States Constitutional Sheriff's Association. I think that if anyone is qualified and willing and able to use a gun, they should be able to do that. I think that, you know, teachers, as well as other business situations, if the teachers are willing and able to and trained to use a firearm, You know, I'm a school resource officer at Eastern Hancock Schools, and I know that there are teachers there who ask me on a regular basis, you know, what I think about this topic. And, you know, I feel the same way about that as I do citizens. You know, if a person is trained with a weapon and knows how to use a weapon and knows the, you know, the parameters of use of force and deadly force, I don't have a problem with it. I think that we could do more at our agency with working with businesses and working with schools to get those teachers trained. And I'm not saying every teacher needs to have a gun, because there's teachers who don't want a gun, and I can respect that. But, you know, I think we can do more to work with the teachers and work with the school administrators to, you know, maybe train part of their staff. And if God forbid there was an incident where an active shooter was in a school, you know, they could intervene and save lives of children. Not knowing who those teachers are would also be, you know, a part of the equation, where if somebody knew that this school corporation had teachers who were armed, it may be less likely that they'd be a target. So I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, and I'm not opposed to it.
Thank you. Mr. Addison, how do you feel about arming teachers or having more officers inside of schools?
This is one of those topics that's it's very, very difficult to answer. Arming teachers, like you say, you have to have the special a special teacher that you're going to arm. I can't imagine arming some teachers as far as having that ability. You have to have special training to be able to do that. You know, our schools are set up, we plan to do everything in our power, you know, to protect our kids, to protect our schools. To me, it may be more of a benefit to try to look for other ways to get security in the schools. I've worked with and talked with a lot of the veterans. You know, the Hancock Memorial Hospital has 480 some volunteers. Maybe this would be something that if our veterans want to kind of be there as far as a resource officer to help, as far as, you know, to be set there and ready, that, you know, they're qualified as far as to be able to do that. But obviously you have to have qualified people before you start thinking about arming certain teachers. You know, like I say, I would do anything in my power to protect our children. I think everybody in here would agree with that. The resource officers, that is definitely a positive program. When I've been talking about the positive police interaction, it goes for the schools as well. When the resource officer is good and kind to students, builds relationships with students, then that helps those students to understand that if you see something, say something. And that is an initiative that we have got to work on. A lot of times these shootings that have happened all over the country, we want to try to do everything to stop them. A lot of times people saw something, but they didn't say anything. And so our job will be to protect our children to the fullest. Whatever it takes, our job is to protect our children. Arming teachers, that's something that you have to have proper training, proper education, and that could be more difficult.
Thank you. Mr. Burkhart, how do you feel about arming teachers or having more officers inside of schools?
Well, I don't think it's a difficult question. I think it's something we need to do. I'm a very big proponent of it. You know, I'm a advocate of the Second Amendment and right to bear arms and carry. You know, since 1999 when Columbine happened, you know, I was a SWAT team operator back then, and I took a real important initiative to train law enforcement in active shooter and how to respond to those events. And so as time went on, as I started teaching that and started teaching it to schools, we started teaching civilian response to active shooter. And I go in at least twice a month to a school or a daycare or a church and teach civilian response to active shooter, and that question always comes up as far as arming teachers. And everywhere I teach this, I tell people, wherever you're at, whether you're in a school, a daycare, or whether you're in a business, you are the first responder. You are the one there before law enforcement is going to get there. Statistically, it's 3 minutes before law enforcement will actually arrive on scene. If you are armed you can stop that situation before it actually gets out of hand. If those teachers are armed and that they are trained to do so, and you can't arm everybody like everybody else has said, you have to be capable of doing that. You have to have the mindset to be able to do that, and you have to be willing to do that. And not everybody's willing to do that. I hear a lot of people that want to carry weapons. That's great and dandy, but if you're not willing to use that in the time of need, then I recommend not carrying it. And so after Newtown, myself and the sheriff went to all the school boards and actually talked to them and said, hey, we're willing to train you. We're willing to train the teachers to carry and possess weapons and have them in the schools. And at that particular point in time, we received no response. They weren't ready to do that. Are we ready to do that now? Possibly. I don't know. Can we afford to put non-trained people inside the facility like veterans? I'm not against arming teachers and having law enforcement in there, but I'm not sure about civilian people. So.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, how do you feel about arming teachers or having more officers inside of schools?
Well, I too, along with everybody else, obviously believe in the Second Amendment, and being a certified law enforcement firearms instructor since 1990, I've trained hundreds of full-time officers and reserve officers over the years. Excuse me. One of the first things I ask a new officer is, before we even pick up a gun, is this question, and I think this would be something that you would have to incorporate into training teachers and screening them, is that if it came down to it, and you were 3 feet away from somebody, and you had to point a gun at them and shoot them and kill them, number one, could you do it? And most of us will say, sure, if they were going to hurt me or somebody else. Okay. Secondly, could you live with it after you did that? And therein lies the problem a lot of times. So I think if you're going to arm teachers, you need to have an extensive screening process to, number one, if they could do it. And then you can start talking about, okay, we're going to put together a firearms training program for teachers. And it's not something that you can do in a Saturday or a Sunday. I mean, you're going to have to commit probably, if I was going to put a program together knowing what I know and for as long as I did, it would have to be at least a 40 to 60, maybe even an 80-hour training course. Because you got to start at ground one. You got to start with asking them with that question I just asked them. Then you got to start with, okay, this is a gun. This is how a gun works. This is how you safely handle a gun. Then you got to go into shooting fundamentals. This is how you accurately fire a gun. And this is how you clean a gun. It's not something that you can immediately say, have teachers say, yeah, I want to carry a gun. If they're going to carry a gun, they have to be qualified to do so, just like us. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question, and this is going to go to Mr. Addison first. We've heard a lot about how the overcrowding at the present jail is affecting the inmates, but how is it affecting the staff and their safety, and will the new jail increase the safety of our staff?
That is a very good question. The safety of the staff is got to be the ultimate thing of what we're looking for. That is a problem as far as with what we have now. We have so many people that are in the jails that they can't be put into individual cells, and when an officer goes in to check on them, it becomes very difficult. The other aspect of the jail and the staffing, basically just the condition of the jail, makes it tough for the staff as far as to get their job done and to take care of themselves as far as their own mental health. So it's a situation of whatever we can do, we're going to have to get some sort of addition to be able to get the jail staff to be able to check on those prisoners with safety. It's one of those things that when they're on one side of the block, if there's just one person there, one female there, it makes it difficult. So they have got to work in teams. They've got to work together, and it's one of those things that safe, like I say, the safety of the jail staff has got to be a top priority. That is part of the reason that we're looking at adding the treatment aspect as far as with things. You know, we're going to have those people involved in treatment. We're going to have it working where they're going to be inmate workers that are out to try to ease the crowding as far as inside there. But until we get proper space, it's going to be difficult to house. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burkhart, we've heard a lot about how the overcrowding at the present jail is affecting the inmates, but how is it affecting the staff and their safety, and will the new jail increase the safety for the staff?
Well, that's a great topic because I've been a big proponent of this since I started as chief deputy, and we've done staffing analysis, and we've done we did one in 2013. We just recently did a correctional staffing analysis in 2017. Everything goes back to understaffing. The safety and security of the staff is very important, and the safety and security of the inmates is very important. We have a bed-rated facility of 157. You're supposed to operate that facility at 80% of that capacity. That means we should be operating that facility at about 126 inmates in that facility. An hour before this presentation this evening, we had 203 inmates in that facility. You have 203 inmates in that facility with the amount of staff that we have in there, and they work 12-hour shifts. And so during the day, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., there's 6 officers working in there with 200 inmates in that facility. In the evening, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., there are 5 jail staff working in that facility. And so at any given point in time, if you have somebody who takes a vacation, if somebody takes off, those numbers go down. And so now you're down to 2 or 3 jail staff inside that facility with over 200 inmates. That does not make for a good working environment for that staff. And I've been trying for the last several years to talk to council, talk to commissioners to up that staff, to get it to a level, so when we get to a point to where we need to build a better facility, we will have that staffing level up to an area where we can manage that. When we build a new facility, we will build it to where the facility is made better, so you have better areas of control, better areas of watching somebody. You'll have towers inside the facility where it takes less people to do some of those jobs. You still have to have the manpower. You still have to have so many people per inmate when it does that. But, safety is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, we've heard a lot about how the overcrowding at the present jail is affecting the inmates, but how is it affecting the staff and their safety, and will the new jail increase the safety for our staff?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you have an overcrowding problem, which we do, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. Even when I was inside between 2007 and 2010, we would run between 180 and 200 inmates, and we didn't quite have the number of jail staff that we have. Until we, get the numbers down, obviously it's going to be a stress on everybody. It's going to be a stress on the inmates. It's going to be a stress on the employees. I think you need to look at as far as the jail command staff, as far as how can we get our jail officers to perform their duties as safely as possible. And if that means, as I think Wayne said, putting them in teams, then putting them in teams. We got to deal with what we're dealt with right now, which is an overcrowding problem. A new jail, I think it will temporarily solve the overcrowding problem, but what are we going to do when we have 440 inmates in this new jail? Our 24 or so jailers that we got now are not going to be able to safely look after 440 inmates. It means we're going to hire more jail staff. Where's that money going to come from? If we hire 10 more jail officers, and I'm just pulling out an approximate figure, but I think I'm pretty close, and they start out at $38,000 a year salary, that's $380,000 a year, just in salary, not in benefits. So where's that money going to come from? So I think, it is a nature of the beast, okay? We're never going to be able to successfully solve this problem, no matter if we build a bigger jail or we reduce it. It is a dangerous profession that we play in, but what we've got to do as administrators and do as a sheriff is train your people to safely perform their duties as possible, okay? There's no guarantees in law enforcement. At any minute, any second, something can go bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Munden, we've heard a lot about how the overcrowding at the present jail is affecting the inmates, but how is it affecting the staff and their safety, and will the new jail increase the safety for our staff?
Well, obviously, the safety of our officers is at the utmost of importance, especially as a shift commander. You know, one of the priorities I have for my officers every day when they come to work is to go home safely. You know, and that goes for our jail officers as well as every police officer. You know, I never want to see the news where an officer was injured while working in a jail or killed because of an inmate riot. You know, the safety of our officers is partially because of jail population. And, you know, the other is obviously it goes hand in hand with the number of jail officers that we have. You know, jail population is not just, you know, building a 400+ capacity jail, because, you know, it's just like the old adage from the movie, if you build it, they will come. You know, that 400-person jail will be filled up before we know it. Then we're looking to the council for staffing issues. You know, I'm a firm believer that if somebody is a nonviolent, low-risk offender and they're qualified for work release, let's expand a work release center and get these people working to provide for themselves and their family, to pay the user fees, and to be less of a burden on our jail staff as well as our community and taxpayers. You know, there is some security issues inside of our jail because of the jail population issues. But, you know, the jail project, the criminal justice complex that's proposed, you know, you're talking about when that building opens, you're talking 2 or 3 years from now. You know, we need to do something immediately to deal with these problems, and we could quickly or more effectively deal with that with expanding our work release capacity till we get some of these people who are qualified and eligible for work release, to get them out and to lessen the population at the jail. But our jail staff, you know, the safety of our jail staff goes hand in hand with the safety of our inmates. And when one is compromised, the other is compromised. So it's certainly something we need to deal with.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question, and this one's going to go to Mr. Burkhart first. Mr. Burkhart, why are you the best person for this job?
Because I think so. You know, like I said earlier, you know, experience, you know, has a lot to do with it. You know, and I've spent my career, you know, making progress. You know, there's a book out there. You know, one of my supervisors gave me at one time, and it says, you know, you don't need a title to be a leader. And everything that I've done in my career, you know, or every opportunity that I've had in my career, I've taken that opportunity and been able to do something with it. And, you know, whether that was in the jail, you know, becoming a supervisor in there, you know, whether it was working the road and becoming a supervisor on the road as a sergeant and lieutenant, you know, whether it was working special operations and being team leader there, you know, whether it was developing programs that I've seen that was fit, as I have been as a road deputy. You know, I started the TASER program because I've seen the need for a tool in the toolbox for officer safety and to cut down on injuries to suspects that we deal with. You know, as chief deputy, I've seen, you know, areas that we need as far as court security, and I moved through the process of adding more members to court security over there with x-ray machines and metal detectors. I've seen the need to provide an element for the autistic and Alzheimer's patients we deal with inside the county, and worked with Greenfield Police Department in establishing a care track program here in the county to monitor those when they go missing so we can find them quickly and the safety of them. And so just being forward thinking, making things better for the people here in the community and being progressive, that's the things that I've done, and that's the things that I will continue to do as your sheriff in making progress for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, why are you the best person for this job?
Well, I think obviously I've said before, I bring a lot of experience, and my experience is not necessarily office experience. I by far have experience working out there in you know, in the county and dealing with the problems that we have out in the county and on an everyday basis. I have worked at different places besides just the sheriff's department, so I think that kind of gives me a little different perspective. When I first started my criminal justice career, I started with the Indiana Boys School in Plainfield as a correctional officer for the state of Indiana. I worked there for a year and 4 months. At that time, it was one of the biggest juvenile holding detention facilities in the country. Obviously, I learned a lot there, being a young man in my early 20s. While there, I became a reserve on the Cumberland Police Department. Obviously, I learned a lot, starting out as a not only a new correctional officer, but a new police officer. I was then hired there and worked with the Cumberland Police Department for 3 years and 8 months and 12 days, but who was counting? And then I was fortunate enough in January 1st, 1992 to get hired here on the Sheriff's Department. So I have worked for different agencies. I've held different jobs in the criminal justice system. I do have an associate's degree from University of Indianapolis. But I think with me, it's just experience. I've worked for 4 different sheriffs. I've seen the different styles. And I think I've learned what kind of sheriff I would be by working under them. As I said before, I think you really need to know how to do the job before you can lead people doing that job. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Munden, why are you the best person for this job?
Well, Brad says I think so. I guess I can say I know so. No, just kidding, Brad. I've worked for more than 30 years to, like I said earlier, to represent this department, to represent the citizens, the people that's in this room, in a professional and fair manner. I've worked virtually every position that our sheriff's office has to offer. I've answered telephones. I've cooked for inmates when the cooks either came in late or called in sick. I've patrolled. I've been a detective as an evidence technician. I have always tried to prepare myself to do the best job that I can for the community. I've always also been aware of the fact that we can't always have the latest gadgets. There are budgetary constraints. We need to work within those to work with the tools that we do have to provide the best service we can for the community. And there's a lot of stuff that we could do with our youth in the community to build a relationship with first-time offenders and high school students, and I see that as as a school resource officer at Eastern Hancock. I have kids that do come in to me one-on-one and confide information about stuff that's going on at school, stuff that's going on at their house. I've had kids come up and tell me about their parents who have drugs and so forth in their house, and that's information that I think because of the fact that I've conducted myself professionally at the schools and treated people fairly, people can come to me and confide that type of information. I think it would be an honor to represent our department and represent the taxpayers and the voters in this room. I hopefully will be able to have that position. Then in 4 years from now, you can hopefully reelect me for that. I think that I've done what I can to prepare myself for it, and I think I'm the best candidate for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Addison, why are you the best person for this job?
I've spent the last 40 years working in the criminal justice system. I started out, I earned a 4-year bachelor's degree in criminal justice and corrections. I took that degree before I even graduated from that point. Then I was hired as a reserve deputy with the Hancock County Sheriff's Department. I was able to work in patrol. I worked the jail. I worked as a dispatcher back those days. I helped work in investigations. I did public relations work as far as in charge of the fair, as far as the security of the fair, air shows, doing all the public relations work. So I did things as far as with the reserve division for a long period of time. I was in charge of all the juvenile transportation, all the juvenile aspect, and then I was hired as chief probation officer. I've spent 35 years as the chief probation officer. I wasn't ready to retire. I had to retire in order to run for sheriff. I'm one, you talk about not being a politician. I'm the one that has been affected by this more than anybody else. I've wanted to serve as sheriff. I want to serve that because I feel like I'm a positive example. I feel like I can do good for the community. And my history of working in the entire criminal justice system sets me apart. I worked for the court system for that entire 35 years. When I talk about being tough on crime, I did hundreds of pre-sentence investigations where I gave information to the court. I gave recommendations to the court. There's a lot of people living in Pendleton, all kinds of prisons throughout the state that I recommended that the court put there because they were bad people. So I have had work in the entire criminal justice system, which I feel like would be a benefit for our community.
Thank you. We've come to the part of the debate where I'm going to open it up for closing remarks from our candidates. And the first person that will give their closing remarks will be Mr. Smith.
I wasn't ready for that. First, I would just like to thank everybody for coming out. Whether you vote for me or not vote for me, I think it's important that the community kind of takes a look at who's going to be your next sheriff. I also would ask everybody to take a look at this new jail, whether you're for it or against it. I think as voters, you need to have the whole picture and the big picture, and I hope that's going to be put out there by the powers to be that have the ability to put that information out there before May 8th. Lastly, I'll be honest with you. You can take one look at me. You can listen to me. I don't dress like a politician. I don't talk like a politician. And I'm never going to act like a politician. I'm a law enforcement officer. And if you want a law enforcement officer to be your sheriff and chief law enforcement officer of Hancock County, then vote for Smitty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Munden for closing remarks.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out. I think it's important. I wish more voters. I wish that we had to use the high school auditorium for an event like this. I think that more voters need to be informed with what the issues are. I appreciate the fact that the library was able to host us this evening, and I appreciate leadership Hancock County for accommodating this. But like I said, I mostly appreciate the fact that the voters, showed up to listen to what the issues were. We've got a lot of issues facing our department, right over the horizon, and the jail population is just one of those issues. Like I said earlier, I've got a detailed idea, a plan B for the jail project that'll be released this weekend in the newspaper and on Facebook and all the social media stuff. And as voters, you need to be aware of that and look at that to find out what the best way for us to spend our tax dollars. There's no doubt in my mind we have a jail population problem, but dealing with that problem is where we need to get creative and do something that's not only effective, but it's something that we can do in the near future and something that we can do to take care of the problem in the best way it suits the community. Like I said, I just cannot thank you guys enough for being here this evening and to spread the word throughout the community that voters do need to be aware and to make sure that they're making informed choices when they go to the ballot box on May the 8th. And I appreciate your time this evening, and I would appreciate your vote for sheriff on May the 8th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Munden. Mr. Addison, I'll open it up to you for closing remarks.
All right, it's a good time because I ran out of time on the last question as far as talking through. My 35 years as being chief probation officer, I was basically in charge of 20-plus employees for a period of time. I was in charge of overseeing 8 budgets, and I was in charge of working those budgets, and 50% of our budget for the probation department came from offender-generated funds. I had to work very hard to collect that funds from the offenders to try to get those things put together. But I did that as the chief probation officer. 25 years ago, right now the major topic of everything is treatment, rehabilitation, and education. 25 years ago, I had the vision to see that we need to hire specialty officers to work on mental health and addictions issues. I hired counselors, and I've been supervising those counselors for the past 25 years. We have had numerous. Now we have 2 major counselors. We have part-time counselors that are working, doing treatment, rehabilitation, and education. The heroin protocol, Judge Culver called me up one day saying, hey, we got to do something. People are dying, and I can bond them out, they're dying. He knew that he could call the probation department. We would make sure that what he needed we would get accomplished. We have a heroin protocol that we have right now. I'm very proud of that. It took cooperation working with the Sheriff's Department, but probation is the one that put that together. I have had those visions my entire career working with probation. I want to take those visions and bring them to the Hancock County Sheriff's Department, because there are things that the Sheriff's Department can be doing that will better benefit our community. We're going to be definitely going to be tough on crime in Hancock County, but we're also going to be tough on rehabilitation. Putting offenders to work, work programs, cleaning the jail, out doing things in the community, it's going to be a positive impact, and then they won't go back to jail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Addison. Mr. Mr. Burkhart, I'll open it up to you for closing remarks.
Oh, thank you. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening, the people that's going to watch it on TV. I think it's important for you to be informed and understand, what the concerns are, what we're dealing with in the law enforcement community or in the public safety community, and this is one way to do it. You hear people saying they're not politicians, and I'm the one sitting up here saying, I'm not a politician because I'm the one saying that we need a jail. I'm the one that's dealing with this on a daily basis, and I have for the last 7 years. We have an overcrowded facility. I have inmates sleeping on top of one another. I have outsourced inmates to other facilities. We're paying other counties to hold our inmates up to over about $1.5 million, well, actually about $500,000 a year is what's going to cost us this year. Now, we get some of that money back from the state for doing that, but if we had the space, we had the ability to do that here, we would be able to retain that money here. I am an advocate of community corrections. We currently have 115 beds over there. They're not full now because we don't have eligible people to put over there. So adding more community bed space, community work release bed space right now is not the answer. If they're not eligible to put over there, then why do we need the bed space? And so the problem we see too is when we put them over there, they violate. When they violate, they come right back to jail. We have to have a place to put them. As the population grows, we're going to have a place to put them. Yeah, if we build it, they're going to come. We did it before. It's going to happen. The population is going to get there. And so I wanted to touch base on that real quick. I know I'm going to run out of time. I am not a politician, and politicians make promises. They will promise you lots of different things. Working with council is something that you have to do. A lot of things that we do comes from the county council. We can't do things in the sheriff's department because county council doesn't let us do those. I understand that. And so you have to do that and work with them. And so lastly, I appreciate everybody's support. I've been endorsed by Hancock County Sheriff. I've been endorsed by Chief Rash. I've also been endorsed by the Hancock County Professional Firefighters Association. So thank you.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of our candidates for a really great debate. I want to thank all of you who have attended tonight and everybody who's watching. Please come back. We've got our next debate happening back here next Wednesday. And thank you again to the library for hosting us. And don't forget, if we can wrap up and be out of here by 8:45, they would really appreciate it. So you guys have a great night, and thanks again for coming.